On the morning of November 24th, 1904, Thanksgiving Day, a group of farmers and engineers gathered in the muddy fields outside Stockton, California, to watch something that had never worked before finally work. Benjamin Holt had a big problem. As the capacity of his newly invented steam tractor climbed, weight increased accordingly. And as weight went up, the wheels on his tractor went further into the soft California delta soil. The need was evident. More traction through greater ground contact area with compactness and better maneuverability. These considerations brought Holt around to the idea of a treadmill type of machine, to pick up and lay its own broad base as it traveled, as if it were a portable railroad. What Holt had built was a 40-horsepower steam tractor with its rear wheels replaced by a set of wooden tracks linked by chain, wrapping around the machine like a continuous belt. When the machine moved, it laid its own road in front of itself and picked it up again behind, distributing its enormous weight across a far larger surface area than any wheel could manage. The movement was so distinctive that a photographer, Charles Clements, described it as crawling like a monster caterpillar. Holt liked the name. He trademarked it 6 years later. What he had demonstrated in that Stockton field was not just a tractor that could cross soft ground. He had discovered the principle that would later power every tank that ever fought in a world war, every bulldozer that ever cleared a road, every mining machine ever deployed at altitude or in mud or on the surface of a landscape that no wheel could traverse. Every tracked vehicle on Earth descends from what moved across that California field. On Thanksgiving Day, 1904. But a great invention and a great company are not the same thing. The story of how Caterpillar became the largest manufacturer of construction and mining equipment on the planet runs through a bitter rival. 2 world wars, a Great Depression, a near-death experience with a Japanese competitor, and 100 years of daily bets that the next innovation would be worth the cost. Let us start with the rivalry, because without it, neither company would have survived long enough to merge. Despite the fact that over 100 patents for crawler-type tractor treads had already been issued around the world, none of them had worked in the field. What Holt built actually worked. And he knew the commercial value of that immediately. By 1908, he had replaced the steam engine with a gasoline-powered motor, making the Caterpillar more practical, more reliable, and significantly lighter. By 1910, he had built a factory in Peoria, Illinois, adding a central manufacturing base to his existing Stockton operation. Watching all of this with intense interest was another, California tractor man. In 1910, C.L. Best established the C.L. Best Gas Traction Company in Elmhurst, California, focusing on internal combustion engines for tractors and introducing track-laying designs by 1912 to compete directly with Holt's offerings. C.L. Best was the son of Daniel Best, who had been one of the most innovative agricultural machinery designers in the 19th century. California, a man whose inventions and patents Holt had actually purchased in 1908 to prevent competition. C.L. Best took his father's engineering heritage, founded his own company, and spent the next decade building machines that repeatedly challenged Holt's on performance, reliability, and price. The rivalry was personal, technical, and commercial. Fierce rivalry between Holt and Best, marked by price wars and overlapping patents, strained both firms amid post-World War I economic pressures. Legal battles over patents consumed resources on both sides. Price wars compressed margins that were already tight. Both companies were essentially burning money fighting each other while European militaries were trying to buy everything either of them could produce. This is where the first of the 2 world wars enters the story. During World War I, Holt tractors were used to replace horses to haul artillery and other supplies. The Quartermaster Corps also used them to haul long trains of freight wagons over the unimproved dirt tracks behind the front. Holt tractors were also the inspiration for the development of the British and French tanks, which profoundly altered ground warfare tactics. The British military actually sent observers to California to study the Caterpillar's track system before commissioning the development of what became the Mark I tank, the world's first. By 1916, the British had utilized around 1,000 of Holt's Caterpillar tractors in World War I. The machine that had solved the problem of getting through soft California soil turned out to be equally essential for getting through the mud of Flanders. But the war created a strategic problem for Holt that his rival exploited. During the war, Holt had a contract to sell tractors to the government. This contract allowed Holt to sell a significant number of machines and required a focus on production over innovation. While Holt focused on the war effort, companies like C.L. Best captured the domestic market with new and innovative designs. By the time the war ended and the government contracts dried up, Holt had a factory full of capacity, a reputation that had spread to every major military on Earth, and a domestic market that C.L. Best had systematically occupied while he was distracted. Best had done the opposite, keeping engineering momentum rather than production volume, and had built an advanced dealer network that Holt did not have. Best had the domestic market, an advanced dealer network and expanded product line, while Holt had a worldwide reputation, the Caterpillar name, and modern manufacturing facilities. Following the war, the two companies needed each other. The post-war agricultural depression hit both firms hard. Military surplus tractors were flooding the used market, suppressing demand for new machines. Neither company was financially positioned to fight the other and simultaneously invest in the next generation of products. The only rational path was the one that Pride and Rivalry had been blocking for years. On April 15, 1925, the Holt Manufacturing Company and the CL Best Tractor Company merged in Stockton, California to form the Caterpillar Tractor Company, with CL Best appointed as the first chairman. Note that last detail. Holt was dead by then, having died in 1920. C.L. Best, the man whose father had sold patents to Holt, whose company Holt had tried to outcompete and outlitigate for 15 years, became the first chairman of the combined company. He got the chair because his products, his dealer network, and his domestic market position were the assets the combined company needed most for its future. The newly merged Caterpillar Tractor Company moved its primary manufacturing to Peoria, Illinois, consolidated the dealer networks of both predecessor companies, and immediately faced the most significant economic crisis in American history. The Great Depression arrived just 4 years after the merger. Revenue collapsed, construction projects stopped, farms went under, the demand for heavy equipment dried up with brutal speed. Here's where the company made the decision that defined the next half-century. Rather than cut R&D and wait for better times, Caterpillar invested in diesel technology at precisely the moment when the case for doing so was economically hardest to make. In 1931, Caterpillar begins producing its first diesel engine, an industry first, the D9900. Diesel engines offered meaningfully better fuel economy than the gasoline engines powering existing tractors, an attribute that was not merely a performance advantage during a depression, but a genuine economic necessity for operators who were counting every dollar. Their machines cost to run. The Diesel 60 tractor that followed proved the technology worked, and the fuel cost difference between diesel and gasoline operation was significant enough that contractors and farmers who needed to keep working paid the premium for the new machines. In 1931, Caterpillar changes the standard color of its machines, from gray with red trim to highway yellow with black trim. The color that is now so iconic that it is referred to simply as Caterpillar yellow had a practical origin. Yellow machines are highly visible on road construction sites, reducing the risk of collisions between equipment and workers. The color also presented well photographically in an era when construction projects were increasingly being documented and publicized as engineering achievements. Within a generation, the color became one of the most recognized brand elements in industrial manufacturing. In 1936, Caterpillar track-type tractors helped build the Hoover Dam. In 1937, Caterpillar machines helped complete construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. The two most iconic American construction projects of the 1930s both relied on Caterpillar machines. These were not just commercial wins. They were proof of capability at the most visible scale available, the kind of demonstration that no advertising budget could have bought, and that the company's sales force leveraged for decades. Then, the Second World War arrived, and it made the first look like a preview. At the outbreak of World War II, Caterpillar track-type tractors, motor graders, generator sets, and a special engine for the M4 tank were bought in great quantities by the U.S. in its war effort. In 1944, Caterpillar machines helped construct more than 70,000 miles of highways across the United States. The scale of Caterpillar's contribution to the Allied war effort was staggering. Track-type tractors moved equipment across every theater. Motor graders built airstrips in the Pacific. Generator sets powered field hospitals and command centers. The M4 Sherman tank, the primary American battle tank of the war, used Caterpillar engines in significant numbers. When Allied forces needed to move faster than roads allowed, Caterpillar machines built the roads. When islands in the Pacific needed airstrips in weeks rather than months, Caterpillar bulldozers cleared the ground. What this did, beyond the obvious production volumes and the revenue it generated, was establish Caterpillar's reputation in every country where Allied forces operated. Engineers and construction contractors from dozens of nations had watched Caterpillar machines perform under the most demanding conditions imaginable. When those nations began rebuilding their infrastructure after the war, they knew what they wanted. Cat dealers were focused on service from the beginning, and by 1928, air service was available for parts delivery. This early commitment to parts availability and service support became the foundation of what is now one of the most significant competitive advantages in industrial manufacturing. The dealer network scale, independent dealers across countries and branches, used for distribution as moat. To understand why the dealer network matters so much, consider what happens when a piece of heavy construction equipment breaks down on a job site. The machine is not an optional asset. It is often the reason the project exists. A bulldozer that cannot work for 3 weeks Waiting for a part from a central warehouse does not just represent a maintenance cost. It represents weeks of delayed project completion, contractual penalties, idle crews, and revenue that was projected and never realized. The old saying remains true today: buy the iron, get the company. Caterpillar's dealer network is built around the premise that the machine and the service relationship that supports it are a single product. Independent local dealers who own their businesses and have their own capital at risk, stock parts for the local fleet, employ trained technicians who can respond quickly, and have both the geographic knowledge and the financial incentive to keep their customers' machines running. Caterpillar's global dealer network operates on this model across more than 190 countries. No competitor has replicated it at comparable scale. The post-war decades brought Caterpillar enormous success, and then, in the early 1980s, one of the most serious competitive challenges the company had ever faced. Komatsu produced its first agricultural tractor prototype in 1931. Through the 1930s, Komatsu also produced tractors for the Japanese military, as well as bulldozers, tanks, and howitzers. After the war, under its new president Yoshinari Kawai, Komatsu added non-military bulldozers and forklifts to its line of equipment. By the 1970s, Komatsu had deliberately set its sights on Caterpillar's global market position. The Japanese company's internal rallying cry was so explicitly focused on Caterpillar that the company's own executives later acknowledged it publicly. The strategy was to use cost advantages, a favorable exchange rate created by a weak yen against the dollar, and continuous quality improvement to undercut Caterpillar's pricing in key markets. In 1982, the combination of a global recession, a historically strong dollar that made American-made goods expensive in export markets, a prolonged labor strike that shut down production for 205 days, and Komatsu's aggressive pricing created the worst single year in Caterpillar's history. The company lost hundreds of millions of dollars and was forced to confront a genuinely existential question about whether its manufacturing model was sustainable. The answer was a program called Plant with a Future. Beginning in the mid-1980s, Caterpillar committed roughly $2 billion to modernizing its manufacturing facilities with the kind of flexible, highly automated production systems that allowed faster model changeovers, higher quality consistency, and meaningfully lower production costs. The investment took years to complete and required reducing the workforce significantly, which generated additional labor conflict. But it produced a manufacturing base that could compete on cost and quality simultaneously at the scale Caterpillar operated. The dollar eventually weakened. Komatsu's exchange rate advantage diminished. Caterpillar's modernized plants proved their cost competitiveness. And Komatsu, which had come genuinely close to threatening Caterpillar's market leadership, found that the gap it had been closing was no longer closing. Both companies remain formidable competitors today, with Komatsu holding the number 2 market position globally. But Caterpillar's lead, supported by its dealer network, its product breadth, and the manufacturing modernization it completed in the 1980s and 1990s, is durable in ways that proved resistant to even a well-executed competitive assault. The later decades of Caterpillar's history are a story of diversification through acquisition, expanding beyond construction equipment into mining equipment, engines, turbines, and financial services. The Bucyrus acquisition completion in 2011 at approximately $8.8 billion, including net debt, used for the mining portfolio expansion history. Bucyrus International, a manufacturer of massive surface mining equipment, including the largest draglines and electric mining shovels in the world, gave Caterpillar a complete product portfolio for the mining industry that it had previously addressed only partially. Combined with its existing line of off-high-A trucks, hydraulic excavators, and wheel dozers, the Bucyrus acquisition made Caterpillar a genuinely comprehensive mining equipment supplier capable of equipping an entire mine rather than just one segment of it. Caterpillar had also acquired Perkins Engines in 1997, adding one of the world's most respected diesel engine brands to a portfolio that already included Caterpillar's own engine line. The combination gave the company engine manufacturing capacity across a much wider range of power outputs and applications than either company could have served independently. The name changed from Caterpillar Tractor Company to simply Caterpillar Inc. in 1986 reflected a company that had grown beyond the tractor business that gave it its identity. The headquarters relocation to Irving, Texas, announced June 14, 2022, used for the Where the Company Goes location strategy section. Moving the corporate headquarters from Peoria, Illinois, where Caterpillar had been headquartered since the earliest days of the merger, to Texas reflected modern corporate priorities around talent access and proximity to a growing customer base in the energy sector. Today, Caterpillar's autonomous mining truck fleet, managed through its MineStar Command platform, represents the most significant technology pivot in the company's recent history. The autonomy milestone involving MineStar Command, tonnes hauled, truck count, and safety framing, used for the tech and innovation section. Autonomous trucks operating in mines run without drivers, following GPS-guided routes, avoiding each other through coordinated dispatch algorithms, and operating 24 hours per day without shift changes. The safety case for autonomy in mining is compelling because the largest accidents in surface mining involve drivers, and removing drivers from the largest machines removes them from the most dangerous equipment interactions. The 2025 financial results confirm a company performing at the top of its capability. FY 2024 sales and revenues, margins, and cash deployment from SEC-filed earnings releases used where the article referenced the most recent annual performance snapshot. Caterpillar's financial performance has been supported by continued investment in infrastructure globally, the mining commodities cycle, and the energy sector, while the company has maintained pricing power and margin discipline that reflects the brand premium its century of performance has earned. Think about what Caterpillar has built since that Thanksgiving morning in 1904, the Hoover Dam, the Golden Gate Bridge, the interstate highway system, the post-war reconstruction of Europe and Asia, the infrastructure of nations that were still agricultural economies when the first Caterpillar machines arrived and are now industrial economies, in part because of the machines that built their roads, their dams, and their ports. The yellow machines with the black trim are everywhere. Today, Metabo holds more than 700 patents and property rights, but Caterpillar's equivalent accumulation of intellectual property in the track and ground-engaging equipment space is measured in the foundational patents that predated the industry and the continuous innovation that has kept the company ahead of every competitor that has tried to displace it in the century since. The rivalry between Holt and Best, which seemed like it might destroy both companies, instead created the pressure that forced innovation on both sides and produced a company whose combined assets were stronger than either had been separately. The two world wars, which imposed enormous strain on production and supply, instead deployed Caterpillar machines across the entire world and established the company's reputation in markets it would not have entered for decades under normal commercial development. The Great Depression, which might have ended the company's investment in diesel technology, instead forced a bet on efficiency that gave Caterpillar a decade-long product advantage. The Komatsu Challenge, which genuinely threatened the company's market position, instead forced a manufacturing transformation that made the company structurally more competitive than it had been before the threat arrived. Every crisis in Caterpillar's history became, over time, a source of competitive advantage rather than a permanent wound. That is not luck. It is the compound effect of 100 years of decisions that prioritize the next decade over the current quarter. The machine that crawled like a caterpillar through a Stockton field in 1904 is still crawling. Larger, faster, smarter, and painted in a yellow that has become one of the most recognizable colors in industrial manufacturing, but still operating on the same fundamental principle Benjamin Holt discovered when he decided that if wheels could not go where the work needed to happen, he would build something that could.